The tragic events of November 9th, 2005 began like any other day in the quiet town of Robinson, Texas. Wayman Keith Gentry, a 31-year-old engineering assistant, was sound asleep in the home he shared with his wife Darlene and their 3 young sons. Darlene was asleep in her child's room instead of her regular room, as her baby was sick. In the morning, when she went to wake her husband up, she heard a noise. She realized that their back door was open. When she went to shut it, she could feel things were not right. The gun cabinet was open, and her husband was nowhere to be found. She hollered for Keith throughout the house, but came across the scene that shook the world. As the early morning hours ticked by, the peaceful silence was shattered by Darlene's frantic 911 call. Just after 6:15 a.m., her voice trembling, she pleaded for help. The back door was open, guns were missing, and most horrifically, her husband was gurgling and bleeding profusely on their bed.
Robinson 911, what's your emergency?
I got up this morning. I was in my son's room because I didn't sleep. My back door was open. My husband's guns are all gone. And there's one room. There's blood on the bed, and he is struggling.
Within minutes, the police cruisers arrived at the Gentry residence, stepping through the front door and heading straight to the bedroom, where they were immediately struck by an eerie sight. Keith lay unconscious, a gunshot wound visible on his head. The signs of a violent home invasion, however, were nowhere to be found. No evidence of forced entry.
Something stinks about this area. I think she did. Something ain't right here, man. I'm telling you.
However, before entering the house, they did notice a stack of weapons on the lawn. Putting their guards up, their only aim was to get Darlene and the kids out of the house. At that point in time, there was a possibility for the killer to still be hiding somewhere in the house.
Guns were found in the front corner of their yard, essentially, closest to the house, and they were neatly stacked.
Leaving everything behind that you'd killed a person for, it just didn't make sense.
The grievously injured Keith was urgently transported to the hospital. He had been shot one time in the head, but was in really bad shape. At the hospital, Keith was fortunately still alive. However, he was pronounced brain dead by the doctors. Later on, the police took Darlene to the hospital, where she was required to sign some consent forms to let the hospital take Keith off life support. This eventually led to his unfortunate death. The investigations then soon began.
I never saw her actually really break down. She had tears in her eyes and mourned, but not like someone like that should have done.
While the case was still in its early stages, and this home invasion was quickly morphing into something more sinister, Detective Tracy O'Connor, who was the lead investigator, made sure to call Darlene in for questioning that night. Under the intense gaze of the interrogators, her just made-up robbery story soon gave away every minor detail under scrutiny. Completely swamped by the intensity, the young, now widowed wife unexpectedly exercised her right not to confess to the crime, asking the Fifth Amendment under the threshold of self-incrimination and demanding a lawyer.
He point blank tells me, I don't know what game you're trying to play. He was, basically accusing me right there. And I said, I think I need an attorney.
She also went to plead the Sixth Amendment of her right to counsel. The shrewd investigators immediately halted the interrogation as Darlene's attorney arrived. But as she departed the station that evening, evidence had already been mounting against her own account.
The more they looked at her and maybe tried to eliminate her, everything just kept coming back to her.
She even gave the police her permission to search her home. After an evidence search organized that evening from the family home, the trail of forensics was already ablaze. In the trash bin of the kitchen, the police got a worn-out set of latex gloves, which were covering a .22 caliber expended round. This was the exact kind of ammunition used to kill Keith in cold blood. Rushed to the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Lab, these critical pieces of evidence corroborated the prosecution's darkest fears. Unmistakable gunshot residue had been detected, along with DNA profiles, definitively linking both Darlene and Keith to the latex gloves and spent casing. With the forensic noose tightening, detectives acted swiftly. arresting the widow on November 28, 2005, just 3 weeks after her husband's death. In the heat of her zealous prosecution, an unlikely savior temporarily emerged. Keith's own parents, staunchly rallying behind their son's accused killer, convinced of her innocence. The grieving in-laws helped Darlene meet bail on November 28th, freeing her from custody by that very evening as she attempted to post her $50,000 bond. They even helped her find a new home for her and the children.
We had 100% belief in her that she didn't do anything.
However, their unconditional support would prove tragically misguided, as even more damning evidence was unearthed from an unexpected source. While the forensic trail lengthened, a pivotal break materialized from an unlikely source, a local landowner named Robert Pavelka. Just days after bonding out on November 28th, the newly released Darlene had approached Pavelka, inquiring about a rural property he owned, complete with a large pond. At first enthusiastically citing her husband's longtime dream of taking their sons fishing, Darlene soon issued a bizarre demand. She wanted the picturesque pond filled in if she purchased the land. The abrupt reversal raised Pavelka's suspicions, prompting him to alert law enforcement. He contacted a friend at the McLennan County Sheriff's Office, who then put him in touch with Texas Rangers, Matt Cawthon and Steve Foster. Cawthon and Foster took a bold step to attain Pavelka's statement and obtain permission to search the pond.
First she wanted the water, now she doesn't want the water. My first thought was she had thrown the weapon in there.
Almost immediately after divers plunged beneath the surface, they struck pay dirt, retrieving a .22 caliber revolver. They devised an ingenious plan to make Pavelka call her up with some great news. Pavelka explained to Gentry that the process of filling in the pond involves the pond being drained. Pavelka said that Gentry ordered him to fill it in, adding that she told him later that she would like to be present when he drained it. The team set up camera surveillance on the pond to see if Gentry or anyone else would show up to retrieve the gun. They did not see Gentry trying to visit the lake. Once Gentry did not show up, Pavelka made another call to Gentry to inform her that the pump was broken and that he would come the next day to pump the pond. The Texas Rangers, ready with a recording device, saw the consequences of their ingenious hunch with this unbelievable story. In fact, less than 24 hours after Pavelka's phone call reaches her, Darlene is seen in knee-high waders at the pond, probing the shallow edges with a rod-like instrument very near to where the dive team had recovered the gun. Her guilt was forever ingrained in the history of events. That very moment when the bizarre final home invasion tale crumbled down, another bad motive was also discovered. The huge $750,000 life insurance policies taken by Keith. The wife had long been haunted by these thoughts, maybe initially provoked by her husband's low-risk desk job, the increasing responsibility and stress of having 3 sons to support. Hauled before the court on February 6, 2007, Darlene's damning video odyssey was aired alongside the prosecution's mountain of physical evidence. Keith's family, who up until this point believed in Darlene's innocence, was forced to face reality as they watched the damning video. After just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury washed their hands of the Black Widow, rendering a conviction on murder in the first degree. The next day, a remorseless Darlene received her fate, 60 years behind bars in a maximum security prison, an insufferable sentence eclipsed only by the shattered lives of her 3 sons, Chase, Cody, and Cade. Custody was ultimately awarded to Keith's reeling parents, as the murderous mother was permanently severed from her children's lives by the court order in 2010. The failure of the killer to admit that she made a mistake and seek a retrial or appeal are the last desperate efforts in the aftermath.
Whoever did it, plus the cops set me up. That's why I'm sitting in here today.
The refusal of Darlene's new hearing in 2017 merely prolongs the confinement within the merciless system of the Texas State Penitentiary until the first possibility of parole can arise in 2037 at the earliest, which is almost a worthless compensation for the life she took away.